Okay, so this is the second video lecture on the chapter of neurobiology. This is the slide I left off before. I was just speaking about the different ways that you can think about the structures of the brain. So let me sort of back up a little bit. You're probably more familiar with the idea of the hindbrain, forebrain, and midbrain. And let me tell you where that idea comes from. It comes from the development of the brain from the neurological tube. So during embryonic development, right, when we're just these clusters before we become a fetus, what will become the nervous system, what will become the brain and spinal cord, actually begin as a neurological tube or a neural tube. The structures that will eventually, and you can see this here, like this is the orange, you've got the yellow is the midbrain, and then you've got the green and the blue actually become like the spinal cord. But the structures that we come to think of as the forebrain are those structures that originate or come from or develop out of, originate in the first part of this neurological tube. The structures that we come to associate with the midbrain are associated with the middle part of this tube, and then the structures that we associate with the hindbrain are sort of the latter part of this tube. Well, that doesn't mean anything, right? Unless you really understand neurological development, that's not very useful. What I find to be more useful is if we think about the different structures of the brain in terms of like their evolutionary contribution, right? So the most basic elements of survival, of life, allow us to breathe, to swallow, and probably to respond to fear. So those are the structures that are in the back, and we might call them the reptiles. So I use the analogy of the turtle, right? The turtle, she lays her eggs in a hole and she covers them up and she leaves, and that's it. She doesn't come back to check on them. She doesn't know how many eggs she laid. She doesn't move them. That's it. It was very, very basic. But the kitten, the mammal, so this would be like the middle structures of the brain, the limbic system, which we'll talk about, the fear, the attachment, these structures, these come from so associated, say, with the kitten, right? So a mama cat, she'll seek out the best place to have her kittens. Or even the bunny rabbit, right? I'm just thinking about, I have some bunnies in my backyard right now. She'll create a little nest for them. She'll leave her fur behind. She'll come back and check on them. She may even move them, right? Mama kitten may even move her kittens from one place to another. If the dog comes and terrorizes the baby bunny's nest, she'll yell. She'll make all kinds of noise. She's a bit more sophisticated in how she and how she thinks about her young. And then the mama, the human mother, will go so far as once she knows she's pregnant, she may open a college account. She'll start thinking about names. She'll decide what her color room is. She may plan, like she is really thinking complexly about the relationship between her and her offspring. And so those, if you think about, that would be the cerebral cortex. That's the part on the outside, right? That's the most sophisticated. If you ever have a chance to look at like the pictures, I think maybe one of the textbooks I used, there were a series of pictures that showed the relative brain structures from like a fish that's mostly the back, mostly the reptilian brain, and the cat that had a little bit more corpus, that part, and so as we become more sophisticated creatures, we have more and more of the cerebral cortex, and those are the folds on the outside. When we typically think of brain, we think of the cerebral cortex, right? And this is just another image of the same thing, right? Forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain, and then how that all kind of folds in over itself. I stuck this picture in there several semesters ago, probably because a student asked a question and I went to learn about it. But there is actually, I have a little bit of a personal story related to this too. Sometimes during brain development or during neurological development, things can go wrong. And one of those things, or one group of things, is when the brain and the spinal cord don't develop correctly. One congenital phenomena is when the spinal cord does not wrap around the spine. I'm sorry, the spine, the bony part does not wrap around the neurological tube, and that's a condition that we call spina bifida. And so the spine is actually projecting out; it's not projected by the bone, and because there are certain fluids within the neurological tube, these uh, birth conditions or these birth defects can actually be identified before a child is born. So my child was born with his intestines on the outside of his body, in the front of his body, but they did do a test. They took the fluid from my abdominal. No. It was a what do you call them? Oh, yeah, where they stick the needle in your belly, and they extract the fluid to see if some of my child's spinal fluid was in the oh man, I can't believe that word escapes me, was actually in the other fluid. Another one is where, in fact, the brain doesn't develop at all. I believe this one is called acephalceal, and or the hindbrain might develop. So a child may develop the cerebellum, so they may have the ability to breathe and the ability to swallow, but there'll be none of the other structures. There'll be no emotional center or no cognitive processing center. So in essence, as long as this child is fed, the body itself will survive. And then there's another condition where the brain evolves or develops outside of the skull. This is an encephalocele. And in this case, the brain is outside the bone structure, but the skin still forms around it. And because again, this is very important, delicate tissue, these come with some pretty serious complications. Another one is this one over here, and this is microencephalocele, and that is when the brain is just very, very small, right? Micro, so it's very, very small. So lots of things can go wrong. At the time, many years ago when I was teaching this, another thing that was in the news was Zika, and Zika virus is problematic for pregnant women because it causes what would be called dysgenesis, and this is malformations of the neurological or of the brain, and it's particularly problematic for women who are pregnant and in the early stages of their pregnancy, because what it does is it fills up the cerebral, or what would become the cerebral cavity, with actually virus and fluid, instead of it being brain tissue, instead of it being neurological development, such as, so here's some fancy words, such as the cortex. The vessels are the spaces that will become brain, or the corpus callosum is the tissue that connects the hemispheres. The cerebellum, this is the bell at the bottom part of the brain. So what Zika virus does is it takes all of those space and all of that resources and devotes it to reproducing itself instead of developing a brain. And the earlier in a pregnancy that a woman is exposed to Zika, the less brain that will develop. So if she's exposed to Zika, say at 38 weeks, after the brain's already developed, that's way less problematic than if she's exposed to Zika at 6 weeks, right? Because before the brain has developed. I haven't heard of Zika. It hasn't been talked about in a long time. But anyway, so that's what these slides are really about, is the neurological development. And again, for our purposes, we're going to talk about lizard brain, which is basic things, breathing, swallowing, mammalian brain, which is memory, fear, bonding, and then the human brain, which is the cognitive, which is the cortex. Okay, excuse me, I'm going to stop right here. And then pick up on the central nervous system in the next one.